Hello, good afternoon. America's new Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, says it's unrealistic to think Ukraine will return to its 2014 borders post-war. His comments came at a NATO summit in Brussels, where defence secretaries have been outlining how they see the war in Ukraine coming to an end. Let's take a listen.
As the war approaches its third anniversary, our message is clear. The bloodshed must stop, and this war must end. President Trump has been clear with the American people and with many of your leaders that stopping the fighting and reaching an enduring peace is a top priority. He intends to end this war by diplomacy and bringing both Russia and Ukraine to the table. And the U.S. Department of Defense will help achieve this goal. We will only end this devastating war and establish a durable peace by coupling allied strength with a realistic assessment of the battlefield. We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering. A durable peace for Ukraine must include robust security guarantees to ensure that the war will not begin again.
Well, Defence and Security editor Deborah Haynes has more from Brussels.
This is the beginning of a series of key meetings where you're really starting to hear from the new administration what their view is about their vision for Ukraine. We know Donald Trump has said repeatedly that he will end the war. They talk a lot about peace through strength. They want to bring Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky to the negotiating table. But Pete Hegseth, here at NATO headquarters, he's meeting with a group of, it's called the Ukraine Contact Group. It's NATO members and non-NATO members that have spent the last 3 years providing military support and other aid to Ukraine. It really actually gives a real a symbol of the way that the US is actually trying to step back from its commitments to Ukraine. This contact meeting itself was set up by Lloyd Austin, the previous Defence Secretary, and has always been chaired by the United States. But today, for the first time, it's the British Defence Secretary that opened the session, and then he invited the US Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, to speak. And it was in that those opening remarks which were made to the public where we got that sense of the shifting US change in policy direction, not just when it comes to Ukraine, but when it comes to the wider security of Europe. He made clear in his remarks that the US cannot have European security its primary focus because it's looking at the threats from China and dealing with threats to its own borders. There was this big, strong message that was heard loud and clear in the room that the US wants the Europeans to do a lot more. There's obviously been concern about Donald Trump's commitment to NATO. His defense secretary just now has said very clearly that the US is very supportive of NATO and a fundamental part of the alliance. But he did say that they will not tolerate this imbalance when it comes to funding for the security of Europe. He very much was saying that European security is Europe's primary responsibility, not the US's. So that's going to be a shock for the Europeans, not a surprise, but clearly it lights a fire under these urgent calls for increased defence spending. But then more acutely, let's just talk about Ukraine. What the US Defence Secretary was saying just now, that the borders of Ukraine that Russia invaded back in 2014, first of all, seizing Crimea and seizing swathes of the Donbass in the east of the country. He was saying it's unrealistic to think that Ukraine can return to before those 2014 borders. This is a stark assessment that we haven't heard before we haven't heard at all from the previous US administration. The UK government policy was all about supporting Ukraine to return its borders before that invasion back in 2014. But the US Defence Secretary now making clear that he doesn't believe that's possible. He also doesn't think NATO membership for Ukraine as part of any security deal is possible. And crucially, he says US troops will not be sent to Ukraine to secure that country in the wake of any peace deal. And that is something that Volodymyr Zelensky has said must happen if any force in that country is to deter Russia.